Welcome to an in-depth review of Gears of War, a 2006 third-person shooter developed by Epic Games and published by Microsoft Game Studios exclusively for Xbox 360. I'm going to be talking about the game in a lot of detail and there will be spoilers, so if you haven't played it, be warned.
For a time, the humans of Sera knew the illusion of peace, until Emergence Day.
All this talk about the Gears of War Ultimate Edition reminded me that it's been about 7 years since I played the original game, and I thought, why not go back and revisit it, see what worked, what didn't work, and examine what it was about the game that helped it to go on to become such a successful franchise. Now I just want to make clear I haven't played the Xbox One remaster, so I'm not commenting on how it looks or plays, whether it holds up as a full price current gen game. This is all about the original 2006 game.
The long struggle against overwhelming odds approaches a final, desperate stand.
So Gears of War is probably most famous for its cover-based combat. It was by no means the first game to implement cover-based shooting, but it was absolutely the first game to implement it to such a high standard that it raised the bar of expectation. So after Gears of War, if you were going to do cover-based shooting, you better do it right, because that's what it was going to be compared to, and anything less would just be unacceptable. But what was it about the cover system that was so good? Well, I think there's two main reasons why it was so effective. The first reason is a kind of obvious one: it works really well. It's extremely intuitive. A simple tap of the A button will slide you into cover, and once you're in it, you can easily move around in the cover, swap between them, aim your weapon, or jump over obstacles. You can also slide into cover from a considerable distance and direct your character towards your intended target using the analog stick, meaning you don't have to be right up close to a surface or facing it head on in order to engage with it. Little on-screen visuals indicate what move your character is going to perform when you press A, which is helpful for new players still learning the system, but also provides a subtle visual feedback for more experienced players who are likely to be focusing on everything else happening on the screen. Leaving cover is as simple as getting into it. You can tap A again to leave, or just pull the analog stick away from the wall, meaning transitioning in and out of cover never interferes with the pacing of the game or your immersion during combat, and can be seamlessly combined with other manoeuvres during gameplay. So basically the cover system works because it isn't awkward or cumbersome. It's fast, smooth and responsive. Now this might all sound pretty straightforward, but getting these fundamentals right was important. Previous to Gears, cover-based combat was mostly a niche mechanic in games. Gears of War, one of Microsoft's big new IPs for the 360, intended to popularise it, and in doing so Epic needed to make sure that anyone would be able to pick up and play the game and quickly adapt to the cover mechanics and find them second nature, and in this regard I think they succeeded. It doesn't take long to become completely adept at using cover the way it was intended, with it quickly becoming second nature. And that kind of ties in with the second reason I think cover-based combat works so well in Gears. It's a reason that's just as important but perhaps less obvious, and it's where a lot of the game's imitators tend to fall short. It's that the entire game is built around the idea of cover-based mechanics. Everything in it is designed to serve that core gameplay principle in some very clever ways. Do you ever notice how games that feature cover-based mechanics tend to nearly always be about stealth or infiltration? It's because thematically they fit together. Hiding behind cover in a game about stealth or infiltration makes sense. There's a relationship between form and content. Well, Gears of War is exactly the same. War isn't just a cool sounding buzzword in the game's title, it's a prominent theme evident by the dark and gritty tone and excessive violence, the reoccurring subjects of death, loss and sacrifice. You're constantly reminded of what's at stake, and you're never in doubt about the heroism of your cause. The way the camera tracks behind you every time you roadie run is very evocative of Spielberg's famous opening scene on Omaha Beach. In fact, the entire game feels almost like Cliff Bleszinski wanted to make Saving Private Ryan with aliens. And cover-based combat is perfect for conveying that gritty, grounded in realism, high-stakes sensation that bullets kill and cover is essential. Gears of War is a game where the core gameplay mechanic beautifully accentuates its central theme. In fact, I'd say it does so just as effectively as the story, the script, the settings, the visuals. The use of regenerating health also perfectly complements the cover system. Damage taken is represented by a crimson skull that grows more and more prominent as you get closer to death, and this emphasises the necessity to get back into cover and wait until your health is replenished. And by having regenerating health in this way, the game can continuously reinforce this idea throughout the game. The combat has been designed around this idea also, because running around in the open will get you killed very quickly in Gears, even on casual. You can't Rambo your way through the game easily, and so using cover is essential. Epic have been clever with how they've balanced difficulty on casual though. Like I say, running around in the open will still be met with the appropriate punishment, but when your damage gets high, for a short time enemy accuracy and aggression seems to suddenly drop, giving you an extra allowance of time to get back into cover before you get killed. It's a really smart way of maintaining the perception of difficulty without actually penalising the player as much. Released during the early days of the 7th generation of consoles, I think Gears of War, along with games like Call of Duty, showed that regenerating health, a pretty contentious topic in gaming, was here to stay. Now I'm sure someone could make a compelling argument for why certain first person shooter games might have been better off with a traditional health bar, and maybe they'd make some valid points, but Gears of War is a game in which I honestly believe regenerating health is integral to the overall experience. If the game had a health bar, then the combat wouldn't be able to emphasise the importance of using cover as effectively. You could run around in the open or risk yourself to attacks, perhaps safe in the knowledge that you have enough health to absorb the damage, or that there's a health pack or checkpoint nearby for you to use. In my mind, Gears of War is one of the best examples of how to use regenerating health effectively, and to not have it in the game would have a significant detrimental impact. Enemies will also utilise the cover system and duck when being fired upon. They'll advance or hang back depending on what kind of locust they are and what weapons they're using, and they'll even sometimes flank you. Engaging with enemies in firefights from behind cover is what you're going to spend the vast majority of your time doing in the game, so thankfully it's an enjoyable experience overall, and there's lots of well thought out touches to the combat. Locust bodies are large enough so that they slightly stick out of cover and can still be shot when hiding. I like to think this was on purpose and was done to avoid player frustration in cases where you're standing around waiting ages just for an enemy to pop up so you'll have a chance to shoot them. I also love that the weapons you use carry over to the next chapter instead of resetting like many games seem to do. It not only creates a sense of continuity, helping each chapter flow into the next, but it doesn't penalise players by stripping them of a favourite weapon they might be choosing to carry with them at all times. Bullets do occasionally appear to travel through enemies when your target reticule is clearly over them, but luckily this is somewhat slightly compensated for by the fact that your reticule turns red when properly over an enemy, so you should know before firing if a shot will register. The problem can make precision aiming slightly more finicky than it should be, but it isn't too intrusive. It's easy to imagine how infuriating the issue might have been if it weren't for such a simple addition as a colour changing reticule. And mercifully, the enemies aren't invincible during animations such as climbing over cover, allowing you the opportunity to exploit their moments of weakness during certain manoeuvres. However, you aren't invincible either, which means you have to be calculated with your actions, and making calculated decisions is something Gears asks you to do a lot. There's a theme of risk-reward running throughout the entire game. Chainsaws deliver a gruesome and satisfying one-hit kill, but you can take damage during the animation, and if you're shot whilst revving it, it stuns you and leaves you extremely vulnerable. Blind fire may halt enemies from advance but at the expense of accuracy and ammo. Active reloads, which require a precise timing to pull off, not only inject a level of interactivity into a normally quite passive function in shooting games, but also offers incentive to players at a slight risk. Success will result in a faster reload, and if timed perfectly, any bullets reloaded in that clip will provide extra damage for a limited time. Failure, however, will cause your gun to jam and cost you potentially valuable time in battle. Emergence holes, where a stock number of enemies will continue to emerge until the player kills them all, are another excellent addition to gameplay. If a player is willing to risk getting close to the enemies and has the time and skill to quickly aim and throw a grenade down the hole, it will seal it and stop any further locusts from emerging. And again, this might all sound like really basic stuff, but what all these things do when combined is give you, the gamer, a sense of agency. You get to make all these little decisions and feel like you have a degree of control in a game that's actually pretty linear. Even down to little things, again, like being able to keep hold of your weapons. The game doesn't say, here's a boom shot, and then 5 minutes later take it away from you. You can keep it and use it whenever you want on whoever you want. One opportunity I think they missed is in the single player, where allies don't bleed out. I think it would have been more interesting if they had the potential to die if not rescued in time, and would have further raised the stakes in battles if losing your teammate led to a failure state. Instead, they'll just lie there until the checkpoint, where they're promptly revived automatically. This aspect is obviously brilliantly utilised in co-op, where you have an obvious incentive to revive whoever you're playing with, but it feels somewhat redundant in a single player game. Perhaps they chose not to include that feature for fear of causing frustration and resentment towards your teammates if they kept getting downed and you were getting game over through no fault of your own, but rather because of AI incompetence. But it just seems odd that they left in the ability for your allies to get downed at all when it serves no real purpose. Speaking of your teammates, AI in the game can be a bit of a hit and miss affair. Half the time in the game, allies will shoot and kill enemies who will likewise return fire and down teammates, making conflicts more immersive because they feel like actual firefights rather than that video gamey thing where you're the hero who has to be the one to kill every enemy and every enemy has to be the one to kill you, ignoring any others who might be fighting alongside you. But the other half of the time, the game does exactly that, and enemies will be so focused on you that they abandon their cover, totally disregarding enemy fire, and allies will literally stand around doing nothing, waiting for you to finish off the remaining opponents. AI can sometimes be a bit erratic, with teammates sometimes charging around, getting into cover for absolutely no reason, wandering around gormlessly on the battlefield, and sometimes doing absolutely nothing at all. There's a TAC-COM thing which you can use to supposedly issue commands to teammates such as attack or regroup, but it seemed pretty useless whenever I tried it, and to be honest that wasn't very often because I barely ever remembered it was even there. It seems like a largely redundant feature. Speaking of redundant, not every section of the game works as well as others. The turret sections, particularly the UAV truck section, I think are pretty damn poor. C Marshall on YouTube has done a brilliant video examining the strengths and weaknesses of turret sections, when they work and when they don't, and if you're interested in a much deeper discussion on the issues of turret sections in games, I'll link to the video in the description and you should definitely check it out. But for me, in a game that's gameplay gives you full control over where to move, where to take cover, when to shoot, when to reload, what gun to use, whether to change cover or flank, etc, etc, to strip all of that away, route you to the spot and ask you to simply point and shoot, that just doesn't work, and it doesn't make much sense either. Not to mention the fact that turrets feel sluggish and unresponsive, it's difficult to see where you're aiming, and the whole UAV turret section is particularly weak. The vehicle feels slow and the UAV light imprecise. That whole section feels gimmicky, and it's like it's been tacked onto the game for the sake of variety, but when that variety is substantially less well developed than the standard gameplay, it just leaves me wondering why it's in there at all. Thankfully, forced turret sections are quite rare in the game and for the most part optional. I think certain ideas like the Berserkers and the Seeders aren't quite as fun as the developers seem to think they are, judging by the number of times they pop up. I didn't mind them the first time, but I could have done without seeing them again and then again after that, since they are essentially repetition of the same idea. Seeders pose little threat whatsoever, as you literally just have to stand there with the Hammer of Dawn on it for a few seconds, that's it. So that doesn't make for the most engaging of encounters. Berserkers at least involve a bit of strategy, but again, these sections feel more restrictive than the standard gameplay and feel like they're only in there for the sake of variety. Other minor gripes include tapping A over and over again to open doors. I know Gears isn't the only game that's guilty of this, but it's a trend I only started noticing during the 7th generation of consoles, of which Gears was one of the earliest releases, and it annoys the hell out of me. I just think it's a pointless exercise that doesn't make opening a door any more immersive, only more annoying. And there's moments in the single player, such as when you move the platform across the water while Dom shoots enemies, where you can't help but wonder why on earth the roles weren't reversed and it wasn't you, the player, getting to do the fun shooting bit instead of being the chump pressing A over and over again. One idea I actually really liked that I wish had been used more, a lot more in fact, is the interactive environments. Every now and then you get to shoot a pipe to kill some locusts or shoot a thin piece of cliff that they're standing on. I wish the game had made use of this kind of interaction with the game world a lot more, and without signposting it either. It would have been great to discover that kind of thing by accident or through using your intuition. Now, revisiting the game and looking at the story and the plot, I've actually come to love Gears of War's approach to storytelling because I realise it does something so effectively that very few other series seem to manage, which no doubt sounds weird as it's not a game that's remembered for its story at all, and if you were to analyse it and pick it apart you'd no doubt find it extremely lacking. But I think this was deliberate because I don't think the focus of Gears was to tell you a story. A good story would normally have a beginning and an end with plot twists or character arcs and resolutions, but Gears doesn't try to do that. You don't ever really find out in the game the details, like exactly why Marcus is in prison and what happened with his dad or what's happened to Dom's wife.
Hey, Santiago, what you doing here? No news on the lady, man. I'll tell you if I heard anything.
So how on earth is this a good thing, I hear you ask? Well, because Gears of War really reminds me of the cartoons I used to watch when I was a kid. Simple stories with clear sides, good guys versus bad guys, iconic heroes and villains where the universes and the concepts were distinctive and memorable. And everything about Gears of War, the look, the feel of it, captures that feeling perfectly for me. Take out the swearing and the extreme violence, give each character a different coloured outfit and a signature weapon, and you've got yourself a classic 80s kids franchise. I can easily imagine being a kid begging my mum to buy me the action figures. Marcus Phoenix with a chainsaw machine gun, I would have gone crazy for that shit. So no, it doesn't have an intricate plot because it's going for that Saturday morning cartoon effect where you can tune in at any point and just get it, not needing to know any backstory. The plot in the game doesn't begin or end because, like a cartoon, it's a setup that just goes on and on indefinitely. At the end of the game, nothing's really different from how it was at the start. They're still at war, the stakes haven't changed. Tune in for the next episode. In fact, just look at the opening cutscene to Gears. It doesn't introduce the story so much as it just tells you the gist of the idea, just like the opening to an 80s cartoon. Just imagine a catchy synth rock theme tune going with it and you're there. As for the characters, they perfectly fit those clearly defined stereotypes you get in those franchises. Marcus is the hero, Dom is the loyal best friend, Cole is over-enthusiastic, and Baird is the Joker. Their macho, impossibly over-the-top proportions, the kick a door open instead of just opening it attitude, all just adds to that cartoon for grown-up spirit of the whole thing. So that's what I meant when I said I love that approach to storytelling. I think Gears of War was specifically designed to tap into the 10-year-old still lurking inside of every adult, and play on our nostalgia for those classic 80s, 90s kids shows that you don't seem to really get anymore. And I think because the game has taken that format, it had really strong franchise potential, a lot more so than I think a lot of other new IPs managed to pull off. But that's why I love it personally. Looking at it slightly more objectively, there could be improvements. I don't think the Locusts are particularly well established as far as enemies go. I know there's all kinds of expanded universe stuff out there by now, but in the original game there's no real introduction to them in regards to like who they are, how long they were living underground before Emergence Day, why they decided to appear when they did and not before. Most good villains normally have a bit of personality and a clearly defined motive, but what drives them is never really explored or well defined. They're kind of just the bad guys that you shoot at. So while they look great and as villains definitely have a presence about them, they don't have a lot of depths in terms of character or story.
Cut off the head of the snake, and the body dies.
As for the script, well, for me it really shines during moments of offhand dialogue. That's when you get a real impression of each character's personality, but also for the chemistry between them and the dynamics of the group.
I can smell you two a mile away.
Screw you, man. Get down here and see how much you like it. There's room for one more. It's a fucking party down here.
No thanks.
You get to hear Felix and Dom talking and you see how they trust each other, and so their friendship is believable. Baird is sarcastic enough to be likeable with it and not irritating, and Cole's exuberance is endearing. They're good characters that fit well within the game. You also occasionally get some nice tidbits of world building information that help paint a picture of a bigger world than what you get to see, which again helps you buy into the Gears of War universe.
What the hell, man? Those holes could pop up anywhere.
You'd think we would have figured out some kind of goddamn defense by now.
Yeah. Command's tried everything, but nothing works. If the Locusts want to come up, they come up.
I used to have nightmares about those things when I was a kid.
Shit. I still do.
However, a lot of the dialogue and story occurs during these walk and talk sections of the game where Phoenix puts a couple of fingers to his ear and you're forced into a walking speed and you can't perform any other actions. Now, I imagine this was done for a couple of reasons. Firstly, for pacing. After a lot of action, they slow things down a bit and give players a bit of a breather, and if the levels were non-stop firefights, then it would all be a bit one note. Secondly, they're ideal for relaying important information to the player regarding plot and objectives. The heat of battle is not the right time for the player to absorb that kind of information, and so by restricting the player's movements and abilities, their game focuses your attention on whatever is being said at that moment. This is an effective method of making sure you know not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it. I found myself actually paying attention to what was being said, and as a result was nearly always aware of what's going on. But the problem, and it is a real problem, they're unskippable. I don't know if they also disguise loading times, but either way, they're likely to become a massive pain in the arse for anyone who just wants to have a quick playthrough of the game. And so these pretty frequent and often quite lengthy walk and talk sections are one of the most standout annoyances in the campaign. Now, it's hard to look back and appreciate just how gorgeous Gears of War looked for its time. Released a year after the 360's launch, I remember feeling like it was one of the first games that had that wow factor where other games looked good, but this made you stop and take note. This is when you finally felt like you'd properly entered the next gen. Hopefully anyone watching who's old enough to have been around for a few console launches will know what I'm talking about. Some of you may even still be waiting for that moment in the current gen. But obviously that's the kind of impact that's lost over time. Visually, Gears of War still holds up well even today, especially when compared to some other games released that year. Character animation is solid, sliding in and out of cover generally looks pretty smooth, and enemies exploding into pieces from close range shotgun blasts is endlessly satisfying. Environments are rich and detailed, and textures still look pretty good. I also absolutely love the point of interest function, where a quick press of the Y button will instantly focus the camera on anything important happening somewhere potentially outside your field of view. It's a great way of making the player aware of important events or objects in the area, but leaving it up to the player's discretion and not forcibly interrupting gameplay. The only times that graphics really looked their age to me were during cutscenes, where the characters' faces look a little bit ropey. Like the first Mass Effect, it feels like they were slightly outstretching their ability with the hardware at the time. Also, Gears doesn't have the liveliest of colour palettes. Everything is just kind of grey and brown, and it makes for a pretty muddy experience. The game is at its best during daytime sequences, where you can really see what you're doing and everything pops quite nicely, but unfortunately, almost half the game is set at night or indoors, where relentlessly dim lighting makes these areas quite underwhelming visually. Character designs are fantastic. As I mentioned already, I like the over-the-top style of everyone. I think it's very in keeping with the tone, but the Locusts are just as well designed, with memorable traits such as the lumbering boomers or lambent wretches that glow in the dark and explode upon death. You get a real sense that the Locusts are an actual organised army with ranks rather than just primitive creatures popping up out the ground, and that's largely thanks to their visual design. Whether it's the snipers with their special goggles or the Theron guards who are dressed in elite looking robes, they look like they're dressed for battle, and the various creatures they have at their disposal, such as Reavers and Brumacs, both covered in equipment and weaponry, indicate through their design that they've been equipped for war. And speaking of weapons, Gears has some fantastic weapon designs. They've taken a bunch of dead common weapons, shotguns, sniper rifles, grenade launchers, they've given them unique and memorable designs, and the Lancer is a gun with a chainsaw on it. What more can you say? But more than just looking cool, I think it's the design more than its function that is iconic. The same way that the COG and Crimson Skull logo have become part of video game iconography, it's really powerful and evocative designs like this that help make Gears of War such a strong franchise. My only other real gripe is with the shaky camera during cutscenes. There's a fine line between cinema verite and total amateurism, and Gears is on the wrong side of that line. I get it, it's about war and they were going for the documentary feel like you're actually there, but the way it swings wildly around, sometimes barely managing to keep its subjects in frame, doesn't feel naturalistic at all, and obviously, what with there being no actual cameraman since it's a video game, you can see the artifice behind it. But that is a minor gripe.
You are the support, son!
Sound is used really effectively in Gears of War as a relayer of information. A whirring sound will tell you your ammo is starting to run low, and a swoosh will tell you if you've performed an active reload successfully, meaning your eye isn't distracted during combat. A boomer mumbling or a torque bow being charged up let you know to be cautious and take cover, as two of the game's most dangerous enemies are in the area. A satisfying power chord ringing out on an electric guitar tells you you've cleared an area of enemies. And the checkpoint sound is ominous rather than comforting, so you know the battle's not over. Gunfire is meaty, especially the shotgun, and the sound of flesh exploding into pieces is delightfully disgusting. And ticking off perhaps the most important aspect of sound design that exists, headshots sound absolutely incredible. And I'm not just being funny, I truly believe a well-designed sound effect for headshots will influence how you play. On casual, a sniper rifle shot to the body will take down most grunts in one hit, especially if you've performed an active reload. But I will always go for the headshot, a more difficult shot to make, just to hear that satisfying pop. The only time I felt like the game failed to provide me with any really useful visual or audio feedback is when you step into a dark spot that activates the krill on the second act. By the time you realise you've made a mistake, it's pretty much too late, you're dead. It feels a bit cheap and a bit unforgiving. I think sound could have been used to give you a bit more of a fair warning. The music in the game though is fantastic, and the main theme does the two things I think are most important in a game's soundtrack. It's catchy and memorable, and it perfectly encapsulates all the themes of the game, so if you hear it, even out of context, it will still evoke all the connotations you'd want it to. War, the military, heroism, sacrifice, etc, etc. Voice acting is top notch also, I really can't fault it, especially from the four main characters. They each have distinctive voices, and them delivering earnest and believable performances is, I think, an important contributor to your buying into the game world.
Now move it.
Yes, sir!
As for the settings, well, they do a good job of giving you an impression of the larger world. As well as all the destroyed buildings and war-torn streets you traverse in the game, the landscapes of ruined buildings in the distance effectively convey the scope of the devastation the war has caused. The giant underground caverns which stretch on for miles suggest the might of the underground Locust army that's hiding beneath the surface and reflect the insurmountable odds the Gears face in the war. Level design, unlike some cover-based games, never feels contrived. There will often be blocks of concrete or sandbags lying around outside of combat zones, and they'll always feel organic, like they belong in the world rather than feeling like they've been arbitrarily placed there for the sake of combat. This keeps the player on their toes, so they don't immediately expect what's coming every time they enter an area, and it also adds to your immersion in the game world. You're in a war zone where nowhere is safe and battles can occur at any time due to locusts using emergence holes as a form of attack. It's a world where everything you see around you, burnt out cars, broken walls, even mailboxes, can be used as improvised cover at any time if necessary. The levels have so brilliantly incorporated the cover system into their design that it's almost amazing to think that this is one of the first pioneers of the genre, and that games coming out several years later still fail to grasp the ideas that Epic demonstrated on their first try.
Here we go.
So finally, Gears of War's multiplayer. Now, like a lot of people out there, I'm sure, Xbox 360 was my first foray into online gaming, and as one of the first huge games out for it, Gears of War was one of my earliest experiences with online co-op and versus gaming. So I'm going to do my best to discuss it objectively and not through my rose-tinted nostalgia goggles. The co-op really shines. All those elements of risk-reward that I talked about earlier are amplified in co-op, where your actions and decisions affect not only you, but someone else, which I suppose is another clever way in which the gameplay emphasises the theme of war. If you run around like a bozo and get downed and killed, your recklessness will have repercussions for everyone. Now, if you're a conscientious kind of gamer, just that knowledge alone is likely to have a profound effect on the way you play, raising the stakes and causing you to be more invested in every firefight you engage in. In fact, just about every experience in the campaign is improved when you're playing with a friend, communicating to each other about tactics, enemies that are shooting you, providing covering fire, flanking, reviving each other when you go down, feeling cut off when you're both forced to take alternate paths. It's great stuff, and I think it's evident from a lot of the design decisions that co-op was a huge focus for Epic. In fact, I'd go as far to say the campaign was specifically built with it in mind. As for the versus mode, well, in a world where lackluster multiplayer modes are so often tacked onto games obviously built around single player experiences, perhaps one of the most surprising aspects of Gears of War is how suited it is to versus mode. Small teams of 4, no respawns, really well designed maps with clever weapon placement, and just the nature of the cover based gameplay where running around in the open gets you killed fast actually means Gears can be a really engaging, tactical, thinking man's multiplayer. It isn't all about speed and reflexes, who can aim and shoot fastest. There's a huge amount of strategy involved where teamwork, just communicating with each other and working together, can make a huge difference to the outcome of a match. A lot of the risk-reward principles that I talked about earlier in the campaign transfer over to multiplayer, but to a much more heightened degree because you're playing against human intelligence. A chainsaw kill can quite easily result in guaranteed death if there's another opponent nearby. Plus there's all kinds of new and exciting risks that come with versus mode. Just picking up a weapon can be fraught with danger. Various players will beeline for a weapon in a race to get the extra firepower first. Others might camp out those spots waiting for unsuspecting players to rush in. Tagging an enemy with a grenade can be a perilous move, as a human enemy may respond by attempting to blow you up in the resulting explosion, or worse still, jumping to a group of your teammates, killing them. And again, the cover-based nature of combat really adds to the tension of a firefight, having a shootout and seeing your Crimson Skull filling up, hoping the enemy will go down before you, or having to hide behind cover desperately hoping your health will regenerate before an enemy closes in on you. Gears of War's versus mode is a triumph of design. If you prefer a slower paced, more calculated multiplayer game, then this is one of the best. At least in theory it is, because unfortunately the game was, and judging by the short amount of time I spent playing online to get this footage, still is plagued with problems. There were numerous exploits and glitches, some rotten players would often exploit to gain an unfair advantage. There was what we called back in the day roadie running, where you could run around with a sort of speed and manoeuvrability that would normally be impossible. You could chainsaw someone and then continue to move away during the animation. You could also get out of the map, making you unreachable to other players, which I managed to catch this cheeky fucker doing during a game. Even without the cheating, the game was host to all kinds of frustrating problems and inconsistencies. Achievements that didn't unlock when they were supposed to, shooting someone point blank with a shotgun more than once only for them to turn around and kill you in one shot, and unavoidable bullet lag in every match unless you were the host, in which case you had a clear and decisive advantage over opponents. Perhaps because this was still early days in terms of online console gaming, but these problems weren't as quickly patched as they might be today, and instead became permanent fixtures of online play. Also, the more common approach to online matchmaking wasn't, at that point, as common, and so lobbies had to be searched for and joined manually, or you could host your own. Now, I actually liked that approach. I like being able to host games with specific settings that you want to play and inviting friends to find your game, doing away with that element of randomness when it comes to maps and players. But the problem is, in a game with such bad host advantage and with people playing to unlock specific achievements, it can result in everyone wanting to host but nobody wanting to join. Also, the most crippling flaw in the multiplayer was that you couldn't join games in progress, so if a player quit early, which they often did, matches suddenly became horribly unbalanced and often ended up with everyone quitting early. All these problems, unfortunately, made Gears of War as frustrating an experience online as it was an enjoyable one. That said, and this is where the rose-tinted glasses come into play, I can't overstate how much fun I had on Gears all those years ago. When it was good, it was so good. This was before the days of party chat where people used to actually talk to each other in the lobbies. This was when every console owner still had their little headsets that came bundled with it and they hadn't broken yet, so everyone had mics. I had fun engaging in good-natured trash talk in between rounds. I made friends in the game that I would play with for hours almost every night, for months, and we shared in each other's joy when we finally popped our Seriously achievements. I still have some of those people on my friends list today, almost 10 years later, who still proudly display their Seriously profile picture that they unlocked when getting it. I know it was far from being without faults, but Gears of War, both co-op and versus, provided me with some of the most fun I've ever had online, and despite its problems, I'm always going to look back fondly on it. So there you have it then, Gears of War. I have to admit, I expected to revisit this game and find all kinds of problems that a younger, less cynical me wouldn't have cared about, or perhaps pick up on things that hadn't aged that well. But to my surprise, I didn't really find that, and instead, I discovered things I loved about the game that I'd never really thought about before, and if anything, developed a newfound admiration for it. Which got me thinking, how many games are there now which feature cover-based mechanics? There are loads. It's practically become a standard feature of modern gaming, like if there's a surface or a wall, you should be able to get up against it. It's almost expected. And I'm not sure that that would be the case if it weren't for Gears. Yet for some reason, you don't often seem to see Gears getting the recognition that it maybe deserves, and it's hard to call a game as popular as Gears overlooked or underrated, but I don't know, if you asked gamers to list the 10 most important games of the last gen, I wonder how many would think to mention Gears, despite it having had a demonstrable impact on the industry, arguably a lot more so than some other more revered contemporary franchises. But oh well, that's Gears for you. Maybe I'll think of it from now on as the unsung hero of the last generation. But I had an absolute blast revisiting the game, and I enjoyed making this video. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. Let me know what you thought in the comments. If you've been playing the Xbox One remaster, let me know how it is, and let me know what other games you'd like to see me review. And you can also hit me up on Twitter @ThinReaper. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.